Hello, my name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is the place where members of the law enforcement community can share their wisdom and experience through me, the chaplain, so that they can encourage others who wear the badge. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from federal agents and detectives, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as local cops in my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain deliver advice and insights so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. I'm learning that when I interview veteran cops, I need to get them in front of the microphone as quickly as possible. Powerful stories and amazing insights start pouring out once they've decided to share, and too many great nuggets get lost when I'm not recording. That sudden outpouring of wisdom happened in today's interview as a brief aside about the 1992 Los Angeles riots became a full-fledged podcast episode that I knew you needed to hear. So today, you'll hear part one of my conversation with Ward Jenkins. Ward was a police officer in Los Angeles in the 1980s and 90s. He worked in the 77th Street Division of the LAPD and was right in the middle of the costliest riot in U.S. history. Don't miss what Ward says about taking initiative, having suppressed memories, leadership failures, and more. Here's Ward Jenkins. Welcome, Ward. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Jared.
I'm glad that you're here. Ward, I am interested in hearing your story. And so can we start with where your career began?
Yeah. I joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 1982.
Okay.
I think if I was 22, I just turned 22, but I think I went in at 21 and probably just made 22 by the time I graduated the academy.
Okay. All right. So right from the get-go, you were young and in LAPD.
Yep.
Where'd you work specifically?
Well, I started in downtown Los Angeles, which is known as Central Division.
Okay.
And then after the first year on the street, when you're with LAPD, you get put on what's called the wheel. They force you to go to a different assignment. Mm-hmm. It's either jail or communications, and I went to communications. So I did 911 dispatching for about 10 months, did it during the Olympics, the 84 Olympics. I got to work some of the Olympic events. That was fun. Then you kind of get a choice a little bit after you've done your turn in the bucket, where do you want to go? And I was young and I wanted to go to 77th Division because that's where the gunfighters went. And that's what I wanted to do.
That's where the action was.
That's where the action was, yeah. So I went to 77th Division and I stayed there for about 12 years until I made sergeant. I went to Hollywood as a sergeant, and then I went back to Central, and then I finished my career doing some administrative assignments.
So in your time at 77th, you were involved in some of the riots, I think? Is that
yeah.
the right time frame? Am I getting that right?
Oh, yeah. The riots started in 77th Division.
Okay.
And, I got the call that first night to go in, and, it was pretty wild.
They you were not on duty when it was starting?
I was supposed to go in that night for work at 11 p.m., but I got the call at about probably 5 in the afternoon. Hey, we need you in here now.
Okay. Okay. Do you have riot gear at that time? Was that with you? Or was that at the station?
It's at the station, and I put the news on, and what I saw was how bad things were. The city was kind of burning, and so I pulled out my own personal shotgun and loaded it and had it on my front seat, and just drove into work. And when I drove into work, I did not stop at red lights. When I got off the freeway near the station, people were stealing cars off of a car lot. It was pandemonium. So. Wow. I knew I wasn't going to stop at all on the way to the station.
Once you got there, do you know how many hours you worked? I know some guys that were working almost around the clock. Yeah,
I worked the first 16 hours, I think, and I had about a 2-hour break, and then I was back on duty again.
Yes.
And when I got to my station, I got suited up and went into roll call. And they said, okay, we have a command post established. We want you guys to go over to the command post. Ride 3 deep in a car, and when you get to the command post, they'll take care of business. So when I pulled into the command post, the first thing that LAPD does, and I don't know if other agencies do this or not, but they kind of do a reassessment. Like, you don't just show up and go to work. You show up and you turn in your car keys, you turn in your radios, and then you go into a pool area where they're going to kind of reconfigure their resources and make sure everybody has a radio in a car. So that's what I did. I pulled up, and now we were in this bus yard. It was a city block bus yard. Public transportation buses ran out of this. So it was a good location, and the interior of this city block, which is basically a giant parking lot with some maintenance buildings around the edges, was filled with police cars and fire engines, just ringing it. And they weren't moving. They were just sitting there.
Okay.
And there were like hundreds of police officers just sitting around when I got there. So I pulled up, and I got out of the car, and they said, put your car keys on this board, and I put my keys on a peg, and they said, turn your radio in, put it over there, and I did that, and then they said, go inside and check in, and they'll give you an assignment. So I walked into the building, and I went to where I was directed to go, and I said, I'm here for an assignment, and they said, we're not giving assignments out here. And I looked around, and there's, again, probably 100-something officers. They're playing cards, they're sitting down, they've been there for hours, And so they said, you need to go back outside and talk to the lieutenant in charge out there. And so I walked back outside, and when I got back next to the board where my keys were and the place where my radio had been stored, somebody walked up to me and said, Hey, Ward, man, if I were you, I would get my stuff back. I would take my car keys back and my radio back. And I said, why? He said, we've been here for 3 hours. We haven't moved. That
sounds like a leadership breakdown.
Oh.
Is that what was happening? Or was there a legitimate reason?
Absolutely, it was a breakdown.
Okay.
So I did. I surreptitiously grabbed my stuff back when no one was looking. And I had two guys with me, two young officers with me. These are guys that I'll be frank with you, I never would have picked them as my partners this night. They were young, they were inexperienced. We just had different personalities. By this time in my career, I'm a training officer. I've got probably close to 10 years on the street. And at any point, I got my stuff back, and I went up to the lieutenant, and I said, Lieutenant, I need an assignment. I'm ready to go to work. And he said, well, you need to go inside the building and check in, and they'll give you an assignment in there. And I said, sir, I did. And they told me to come out here and talk to you. And he said, I don't know what the bleep is going on. And he turned his back on me. So I stood there at a loss for a second, because the city was literally burning all around us at this point.
Right.
We'd had a fireman shot in the face. We'd had fire engines overturned. We'd had officers go down taking rocks and bottles. It was bedlam. And somebody from the fire department was there, and he walked up to me and he said, excuse me, did I hear you say that you have 2 police cars ready to go to work? And so I was the senior officer, and we had my 2 guys with me, and then we had another car that followed us over there. So I had 2 cars with 6 officers in them.
Yeah.
And I had all my other guys just sitting in their cars. I gave them back their equipment. I said, just sit tight, wait for me. And so he said, are you ready to go to work? I said, yeah. He said, well, see that fire chief there with all the scrambled eggs on his fire helmet? I said, yeah. He said, well, when he's alone, don't interrupt him, but when he's alone, go up and tell him that you're ready to go to work. I said, okay. So I waited no more than 30 seconds, and he was alone, and I stepped right up. I said, excuse me, sir. And he flipped around. I don't know what rank he was. He was pretty high up, and a little frustrated. Yes, like, what's this police officer talking to me for? And I said, I have 2 police cars, and I'm ready to go to work. He said, oh gosh, okay, go in this trailer and tell him that. So he pointed for me to go into the fire trailer. They had a
command post,
a command trailer set up. Now there was a police trailer and a fire trailer, and he told me to go in the fire trailer. So that's what I did. And when I got inside the fire trailer, my captain and one of his lieutenants were standing there in their civilian clothes. They had been called in. All the command staff was out at training when the riot started, out of town.
Oh, wow.
And they all had to drive back a couple of hours. That was one of the big things that was learned.
Right.
So he was in the fire trailer, and I said, oh, hi, Cap. He said, Jenkins. I said, Lieutenant. And then I just turned to the guy at the desk who was a firefighter, and I said, hi, I've got 2 police cars. We've got radios. We're ready to go to work. And he said, oh, my gosh, that's great. My captain said, wait, Jenkins, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm ready to go to work. And he said, well, you need to go inside and check in and get an assignment there. And I said, well, I did. And they told me to come out and talk to the lieutenant. And he said, well, did you? I said, yeah. And he told me he didn't know what the blank was going on. And he turned his back on me. And the lieutenant that was standing next to the captain, great guy, he's passed away now, he put his hand on the captain's arm, And he said, Cap, let them go to work.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't following protocol. I wasn't doing West,
But at that point, protocol was breaking down.
It was
This was dysfunctional.
It was broken.
Yeah.
And I'll demonstrate how bad it was. The guy at the desk, after he saw that my captain had released me to do it, he wrote something down on a piece of paper, and he said, your job is going to be to lead a fire team to this call. One of you needs to be in front of the team, and one of you needs to be behind the team. And whoever's in front of the team is going to be the guy picking how they're going to get there. Mm-hmm. I didn't think that was going to be a big deal, but it turned out to be a big deal.
Okay.
And I said, okay. He said, your first call is a baby that stopped breathing 3 hours ago. That's how bad it was. That's how bad it was that night. So that was my first call. Things had just shut down.
Wow.
And we had a child that had stopped breathing, and the fire department couldn't go because they'd already had a firefighter shot in the face.
Right.
They couldn't go without the police, and the police were immobile.
Yeah.
So that was the start of the riots for me, and it didn't get any better from there.
You said you did 16 hours and then came right back again.
Yep. And they had some temporary cots set up. I didn't sleep. I mean, I'm smoky. I didn't have any. I think we always had one extra T-shirt and change of clothes in your locker. But I laid down and tried to close my eyes and got something to eat and drink, and then got back up. And when I got to roll call on night, this is the start of the second night of the riots. We sat in roll call, and now I'm with my normal crew of guys that work graveyard shift with all the veterans and stuff. I didn't know where they were. I never saw them that first night. And so this same lieutenant now who'd been at the command post was now our watch commander, and he was telling us, report to the command post and go to work. Well, my senior partner grabbed me and said, Ward, don't leave the roll call room. Let everybody else leave. And so all the officers filed out except for, I'm going to have to do the best I can remember here, like 12 of us and 2 sergeants stayed behind. And we stayed behind because we weren't going to go to the command post, so we disobeyed orders. And what we did was we went out and got in our police cars and cleared. And that night, the second night, we formed 2 teams, and 2 police cars just followed each other around. So there was an Alpha team and a Bravo team. And these 2 teams handled every single radio call that came out the second night in 77th Division. And the hundreds of officers were at the command post. I never saw any of them. I don't know what they did. So it was the only time in my career that I actually disobeyed a direct order. I did it in order to perform my job.
Isn't that commentary on the types of people who become police officers? There are people who are called to go help.
Yes.
And there are people who have a good government job.
Yes.
And when things are difficult, the ones who are called to help are willing to think on their feet, be proactive, to self-initiate, even if it's technically, breaking a rule, because they want to do the right thing. They understand with some wisdom that this is more important than following a rule, where the second group will allow that rule or procedure to stop them from doing good.
Correct. And I think a lot of police officers can fall into that, and deputy sheriffs, or, whatever your law enforcement role is, and depending, I worked in 77th Division. It was really a busy, busy place to work back in the 80s, and this is the early 90s. And, I might handle 25 radio calls in an 8-hour shift. That would not be abnormal at all. One night my division had 5 unrelated homicides. And we had 6 police cars working that night. And so the first 5 cars caught a homicide scene, and the 6th one took coffee around and tried to handle all the other calls that were coming out. And it was just that it was wild. And so, but we can get in the mindset that I'm just chasing the radio and the department is just going to tell me what to do. And when you do that over and over and over, you can start to forget that you actually have a mission out there when someone's not telling you what to do.
Right.
But there is a need.
Yeah, your role narrows down to, I only act when I'm told.
That's right.
And that's
dangerous.
That's not good police work.
No, it's not.
No. Good police work can happen when you're told what to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you have to be able to step back and think, And you see the bigger picture.
Correct.
Than just being narrowly focused.
Correct. And and so actually what happened was I did about 12 hours, came to the station, and then they asked for people to go back out. So I looked at my team and I said, it's up to you guys. And we were all like, let's go back out. So we just went right back out. So that's why it turned into, I think, 16 or whatever. And on the second part of this, on my deployment, and what was happening as we were trying to lead, it was like maybe 2 or 3 fire engines, a battalion, some kind of a chief in an SUV, and then a rescue ambulance that would form up
like a convoy.
They called it a strike team. And basically, and so you got a police car in the front and in the back, and basically we stretched out over a city block anywhere we went. And what would happen is you'd get a call and you knew where you were going, but as you're driving there would be fire equipment completely blocking your path because they were fighting a structure fire. And so you had to turn sometimes down alleys, but you had to be really careful about which alleys you went through because we got big apparatus behind us. So actually leading and driving around that night turned into a big deal. At one point we were fighting a fire. It was daytime. It was the riots had started the day before. And so now this is probably about 16, 17 hours into it. And we had to stretch ourselves out over the city block in order to fight this structure fire. And so I told my officers our job is to protect the firefighters. And so we got out of our cars. There were 6 of us, and we basically took up positions covering a city block. And my end was on the north side of the place where we were fighting the fire, and there was nothing to my north except more rioting.
Okay.
As the line stretched to the south, the officer that took the south position, there were other police and apparatus that were fighting fires to our south, so they weren't exposed. Does that make sense?
Right. The north end was the flank.
So I was, and I was a senior guy, and so I put myself there because I figured that's my job.
You're at the end of the line.
I'm a training officer. I was the only training officer of the group of 6, and so I'm taking it. And Jared, there was an auto parts store that was down the street from me, and the rioters were starting to break into it, and there was a woman inside, and she started screaming for help. And I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. And bear in mind that all through this night, I heard officer after officer put out a help call with no response.
Right.
If you needed help, you were on your own. Whatever was going to happen, you were on your own. And I'm not going to tell you that this was the right decision. It's been a decision that it will haunt me forever. But I chose to ignore her in order to protect the firefighters.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the choice I made. And I just heard her screams dying out once they bent up the security grate that she had locked herself into her store to protect her store, and they bent the grating up down by the sidewalk and crawled in and broke the glass and got to her. And that's the last thing I hear is her screams dying out. And the only solace I really have is that my firefighters were safe that night.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the biggest, I think, wounding of me for the riots was, I know it was. In fact, I repressed that memory. I actually completely repressed that memory. If you had asked me 2 months later about my experiences in the riots, I wouldn't have even brought that up.
Sure.
I was actually coming home from a counseling appointment because I was finally talking with somebody about a shooting I'd been through. And I had this memory come back as I was driving home, and it seemed alien, and it seemed like, did I make that up? That's so weird. I don't remember that, but I remember it, And,
yeah. Yeah.
And then I remembered that a buddy of mine, when the riot started, Ward, he told me, Ward, you need to take a cassette tape recorder and record on your way to and from work about all your experiences. And so I remembered that I'd made this cassette tape, and I had to go dig it out because it had been years, and I found it and I played it and I recounted the story on it.
Really? Wow.
And so it was like, I can't. So when people say they repress memories, I always used to think, well, you need help.
Right. Or they're being dishonest or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
But now I fully understand it. We do. When we encounter things that are too painful for us to cope with, we suppress them, but it doesn't mean that they're gone because your body knows that those memories are inside.
Yeah. 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 There's evidence in your health, physically and mentally. There's evidence that has happened, and that those memories are there, even if we're not acknowledging it.
I wasn't planning on sharing all that.
Yeah, but it's good and it's authentic. It's good stuff.
It's a big part of my story.
So you were saying that even without actively remembering it, it was sticking with you. The trauma was sticking with you.
I recently, when I was going through my chaplaincy training, a book was recommended, highly recommended, and it's called The Body Keeps Score.
Yeah, Bessel van der Kolk.
And if anyone out there is interested in trauma, read this book, The Body Keeps Score. And it talks about the fact that your brain, they can look on a brain scan and see that you've had trauma.
Yeah.
So when this came back to me, then I got it out, and I had to wrestle with it, and honestly, if I had to make the same decision again, I would make the same decision again. Well,
tactically, that was the right decision because you were on the extreme flank of
I couldn't leave.
Of operations.
If I went down there, I would have been alone. If I'd pulled an officer or two with me, there's no guarantee that we would have survived. I mean, my mission was protecting the firefighters, and that's where I stood.
But this is the kind of devil's fork that you get in police work
and combat,
where you are picking between two really bad options.
Yep. There was a no-win.
Yes. You're going to suffer. You're going to lose either way. And so you either abandon your post and try to help and may or may not be successful in that, or you continue your mission and know that something else is not getting tended to. That I think a lot of people in combat have experienced that, and I think a lot of cops have experienced that.
Right. And for us as police officers, we want to make an impact and we want to help, and so it really hurt me to not be able to do that.
Yes.
So
it's a moral injury.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Absolutely. At this point in my life, I had pretty strong faith. I mean, I would tell you that the riots internally, I'm kind of a deep thinker sometimes, but the riots kind of spun me out a little bit like, man, what am I even doing this job for when I see all this bedlam and all this turmoil? And I had to actually sit down and do a little math game in my head of, okay, Ward, how many rioters did you actually see in the first couple of nights of the riot? And so I came up with some number, maybe 10,000, which it probably wasn't 10,000. It was probably 2,000 or something. But I'll be really generous and say I saw 10,000 people looting stores and stealing cars and burning things and whatever else. And then I asked myself, how many people live in my division? Of 77th Division, and it was 160,000. So I said, well, even if 150,000 people were locked in their homes because they were scared, that's why I'm there.
Yeah.
So I actually had to go through this whole numbers game to even make sense out of it all.
Is it difficult to patrol, after the riots, is it difficult to patrol a neighborhood and not identify the neighborhood with that minority of people who were causing trouble? I mean, I feel like that's the normal thing. You want to identify it with all the people you're there to serve. But if you know that, well, this gang or this troublemaker or this particular family are causing trouble down here, you think of that, I'm entering their space. And you associate the physical space with that tiny minority of people who are causing trouble.
Yeah.
Did that happen with you?
No, because it always happened. But that happened every night you went to work because you're only dealing with whatever very small percentage of hardcore violent criminals live within a city. The vast majority of the people that live in any city are good people.
Yeah.
So it was.
But they're not the ones you interact with.
That's right. It was always that way. And when you do interact, that's the hard thing about being a police officer. When you do interact with the good people, it's because they've been broken and they need help.
Yeah.
So you're either dealing with good people who are broken or bad people who are doing the breaking.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're the same.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Sometimes one guy is the suspect on one call, and 2 months later...
He's the victim.
He's the victim, yeah. So,
Were there other aspects of the riots that, if it didn't maybe stick with you, but maybe your coworkers, you had friends that, there were certain elements that really rattled them or really got to them that maybe they probably weren't willing to talk about at first?
Man, you know what? I never shared that discussion with anybody because I repressed it. So we didn't talk about the failures. I had a buddy who was out. So the first night that I was out, where I went in the fire trailer and got my assignment, these old salty veterans that worked graveyard shift, we called it morning watch in 77th. They also disobeyed orders the first night. And they went on patrol, and he had a woman who had been shot in the head. She had been a gunshot to the head, I think right in one ear and out the other, basically. And he was radioing for an ambulance, and he waited 25 minutes. And finally, they picked her up, put her in the police car, and drove her to a hospital because nobody was coming.
Yeah.
So I did hear that. I heard that story. So I knew how bad things were,
Right.
And of course I heard it on the radio over and over. I heard people asking for help, and there was there was no help. You had to solve whatever problem you had, or you weren't going to get help.
So let me ask the question a different way. The people in your division, how did they talk about the riots in the months and years afterward?
Very much upset that leadership had frozen.
Okay.
Very much upset because we all believed that we had the means to stop the riots before they had spread.
Okay.
There was actually, at the very, very beginning of the riot, we have a metropolitan division in LAPD, and from metropolitan division, you pull your SWAT, your canine, and then you just have officers who aren't responsible for handling radio calls, but they are a ready reserve patrol force. So we had a platoon of metro officers, 40 officers that were in 77th because there was things that were starting to go sideways, and we had an officer. Two officers were on some kind of a call. They were out of their car. They started taking rocks and bottles. One of the officers went down. The partner officer who was still up put out a help call. And I'm telling you, in LAPD, if you put out a help call, it means I need the world here and I need it now. And if you're 30 miles away from a help call and you hear a help call come out in LA, you're actually starting to think about, do I need to go?
Yeah.
And this lieutenant who I encountered later on got on the radio and gave an order that no one was to respond to the help call.
Really?
Do not respond to that help call. And this metropolitan division that was ready to go in with 40 officers and take back control of that whole area. And by the way, that was happening at Florence and Normandy, which later on turned out to be the flashpoint of the riots. They said, we're here, we'll go in. And he said, no, do not go in. I think he was afraid of inciting things.
Okay.
Perhaps. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it was a bad decision. The truth is, I wish those guys had disobeyed the order and gone in anyway.
Because it might have.
Stopped it. I think it would have.
Nipped it in the bud.
Honestly, maybe. I think it would have. Yeah. Two other officers heard the help call. They disobeyed orders and rolled to the help call and rescued the first two officers and got them out of there. Dragged them back to safety, and the other thing that happened was we had some undercover officers that were outside of a liquor store near Florence and Normandy and saw suspects loading up Molotov cocktails into their trunk of their car, and put out a broadcast. We need assistance. We have suspects loading up Molotov cocktails, and there was nobody available. And they started to follow the suspects until they got burned, and the suspects just took off. The undercover officers were in a non-police car. They were in a rental car.
Yeah.
Couldn't keep up with them, and then it was shortly after that all the fires broke out. So we had these opportunities to absolutely stop the riots before they started.
Yeah.
And we failed.
The LA riots were of historic importance for any number of reasons. Racial violence, massive destruction of property, death and injury, and new and unknown dangers down every street. All of these things were traumatic to cops, and I want to thank Ward for sharing about them. But it's interesting to me how often cops like Ward feel a lasting betrayal when city and department leadership fails them. More often than you'd think, these leadership failures leave lasting wounds, which end up right next to the other traumas an officer endures. In Part 2, Ward discusses the most pivotal moment of his law enforcement career and his life, when he suffers the death of a close friend and partner on the police force. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I heard the help call come out. I was actually getting dinner, and so I abandoned my dinner and raced back toward the station toward my division looking for the suspects because I knew which direction they had left in and what color car they were in, and I didn't find the suspects, and I didn't know that Danny had been killed at first. I just knew that an officer was down. And so through a sequence of events, I met up with some officers, and I called the station because I detained some possible suspects, but they weren't the right ones. And so I said, who was hurt? And they said, well, we heard it was Danny. And so I said, well, it was Danny. Well, how is he then? We don't know. We don't know what his condition is. So I left. I hung up the phone, and we left. And I found some other officers that were detaining some gang members. And I got out of the car, and I walked up to one of the guys, and we started talking, and he said, did you hear the news? And I said, well, yeah. He goes, the officer died, but I don't know who it was. And I said, oh no, it was Danny.
Again, don't miss part 2. It'll be episode number 42.5. I really want you to see how Ward overcame these hardships to become the man that he is today. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.